black, and still dares to speak. That's what they saw when she stepped out of her car, just a silhouette with too much pride, too much calm, too much knowledge of the law. The gravel lot was empty. The air held its breath. A gas pump clicked once, like a warning shot. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't raise her hands. And yet the boot came anyway. It didn't matter who she was. Not yet. Because in towns like this, power doesn't ask questions. It assumes answers. It doesn't check names. It checks skin. But what they kicked that day wasn't just a woman. It was the federal consultant assigned to audit their entire department. And the camera was already rolling. Where are you watching from? And what time is it right now? The sun hung mercilessly over a cracked strip of highway where nothing but dust and time seemed to survive. The kind of road forgotten by maps, stitched together with faded paint, and the occasional gas station that refused to die. There, among rusted pumps and a half-lit sign that once read "Quick Fill," a black sedan pulled in, slow and steady, as if its driver was measuring more than just mileage. Rosa Franklin stepped out. To any passerby, she might have looked like someone's grandmother on a long drive. Loose slacks, sensible shoes, a soft green cardigan faded from too many wash cycles. But her spine was straight, her steps deliberate, her hands steady. Rosa wasn't just traveling, she was watching, breathing, listening. She didn't come here to make noise. She came to refill her tank and keep moving, nothing more. But trouble doesn't need permission, and in some places, it doesn't wait for a reason. As Rosa reached for the gas nozzle, a beat-up patrol car rolled in behind her, tires crunching gravel like old bones snapping. She didn't look up, not at first. The engine stayed running, low and grumbling. The driver didn't move. A silence settled, not peaceful, but heavy. Like the moment before a storm hits the trees. Then the door creaked open, and he stepped out. Sheriff Derek Malloy, tall, broad, white. His mirrored sunglasses caught the sun like daggers, and every movement was the performance of a man who believed the ground owed him respect. He didn't walk, claimed space, and he walked straight toward her. Rosa's hand tightened around the gas handle, but her body didn't flinch. She had stood in front of men more dangerous than him. But something about the way he looked at her made her pulse shift. He didn't see a woman. He didn't even see a threat. He saw a target. "You from around here?" he asked. His voice dipped in fake politeness and something colder underneath. Rosa replied calmly, without turning. "Just passing through." He took a step closer. "License?" She paused, turned slowly, meeting his eyes behind that glass. "Have I done something wrong?" Malloy smiled. "Not kindly. You're filling up at the wrong station, ma'am." And that was it. No accusation, no warning. Just a statement soaked in venom. Rosa nodded once. She reached into her pocket, carefully, no sudden moves. Her fingers brushed the leather of her wallet, the same one she'd carried during her time on the federal bench. Back when people called her Your Honor, before she retired, before she chose silence over spotlight. She pulled out her ID. Malloy took it like it disgusted him. Read it slowly, exaggerating every syllable of her name. Franklin. Rosa. He repeated it like he was spitting something bitter. She didn't react. Behind her, the pump clicked off. The tank was full. But no one moved. The wind didn't blow. The street was dead. Just her, him, and a teenage girl behind a vending machine, frozen with her phone half raised, camera lens barely peeking over the machine's edge. And then it happened. No siren, no escalation, no warning. Malloy took one step forward and kicked. His boot slammed into Rosa's left shin, just below the knee. Not a nudge, a full-force blow designed to hurt, to knock her down, to humiliate. And it did. Her knee buckled. She hit the ground hard. Gravel bit through her slacks. Blood ran dark down her calf. Her palms scraped against the pavement. And still she didn't scream. Rosa bit down her pain the way she had her whole life, silently, without showing the man anything. Malloy stood over here, sneering. "That's more like it," he muttered. "Now you look like you belong here." Then he turned and walked away like nothing had happened. Like he'd just tossed a piece of trash. The teen behind the vending machine didn't blink, didn't breathe. Her thumb hit record. 17 seconds of video. 17 seconds that captured everything. The approach, the confrontation, the kick, the fall. And most importantly, Rosa's face as she looked up from the dirt. Bloodied, bruised, but not broken. Her eyes didn't plead. They didn't cower. They judged. She didn't get up right away. She placed one hand flat on the concrete, feeling its heat, grounding herself, breathing deep. Then she rose, not like someone retreating, but like someone gathering strength. She turned her back on the cruiser, didn't say a word, didn't scream, just walked, slowly, toward her car. And the girl with the phone, she whispered just 2 words before hitting upload. Let them see. What Sheriff Malloy didn't know was that the woman he kicked wasn't just someone's grandma. She was the woman who once sentenced a governor's brother for obstruction of justice. She was the woman who stood alone against a cartel-backed jury and won. She was the woman whose silence was never weakness but restraint. And now, that silence was ending. Because a single kick in a dusty parking lot wasn't just an assault, it was a match. And what Sheriff Malloy had lit was about to burn through everything. The video went online at 4:17 p.m., posted by a teenager with less than 100 followers. The caption said only, "This just happened. She didn't do anything." No hashtags, no dramatic filters, just shaky footage from an old phone with cracked corners and a smudged lens, raw, grainy, and undeniable. For the first hour, it floated in digital limbo. A few views, a couple of confused comments. But by 5:12 p.m., it started moving quietly, like a tide rolling in. Someone reposted it to a subreddit on police overreach. Another user slowed the footage, rewound it, and added a single heartbreaking caption, "She never even flinched." At 6:08, it hit Twitter. And then, it was no longer just a video. By 7 p.m., it was on the front page of Reddit. People weren't just reacting, they were connecting. Some were angry, others quiet, most were stunned. The kind of stun that happens when you see something you've always suspected, but never wanted to be true. A mother in Oklahoma commented, "That could have been my sister." A Vietnam vet in New Jersey wrote, "I've seen combat. I've never seen someone stand that calm after being kicked like that." By 8:30, the view count had passed 1 million. It wasn't because the kick was particularly violent. It wasn't flashy. There was no gun. No bloodshed caught in slow motion. What caught people was the silence. The way Rosa went down and didn't scream. The way she got back, up, not vengeful. Not panicked, just firm. Just present. Like granite rising through the earth. In a small neon-lit diner off Route 83, a waitress dropped a tray when she saw it playing on the television above the counter. She froze, mouth half open, coffee dripping onto linoleum. Her manager tried to calm her. She just shook her head. "That's my aunt," she whispered. The manager thought she meant metaphorically. She didn't. Across the country, in a senior care home in Georgia, a retired teacher sat alone in the common room, watching the video on a donated tablet. She pressed play. Then again, and again. By the 4th replay, her hand began to shake. She turned off the news channel she usually kept on all day. Then she whispered to no one in particular, "Finally, they see what they do to us." Meanwhile, in a quiet farmhouse between 2 ridges and a soybean field long out of season, Rosa Franklin sat at her kitchen table. She hadn't turned on the lights. The sun had dropped below the hills, painting the floor in a soft amber glow. Her phone buzzed. Once, then twice, then dozens of times, vibrating like a trapped memory she couldn't shut off. She let it ring. It wasn't that she didn't care. She just knew what was happening now, didn't need her voice yet. The world had seen her fall, but more importantly, it had watched her rise. Rosa finally picked up the phone and scrolled through the messages. Former students, former clerks, colleagues, strangers, some asking if she was okay, others begging her to speak. One simply wrote, "Thank you for standing." She placed the phone face down on the table and stood up, moved slowly, steadily, to the back room, past the laundry basket, past the old quilt her mother stitched during the marches of '65. She opened a closet lined with law books, and behind them, a locked wooden case. She hadn't touched it in nearly a decade. Inside lay her badge, heavy, brass, faded. United States Federal Judge. Retired. She stepped back, holding it in her hand like a mirror that told the truth. She hadn't walked away from the bench because she was tired. She left because she was angry, because after 30 years of sentences, she couldn't stomach watching accountability become a myth in polished shoes. Because every time she handed down a ruling, someone else higher up erased its meaning. And now, the very system she once served had met her on a gas station lot, and it kicked her. In the sheriff's office back in town, Derek Malloy sat behind his desk, sipping cheap coffee from a back-the-blue mug, completely unaware. He wasn't online. He didn't read Twitter. He didn't think a simple checkup on a suspicious woman could possibly spiral beyond a local grievance. In his mind, he had done nothing wrong. Just another day. Just another black woman with attitude. He didn't know that by midnight, her face would be everywhere. He didn't know that the badge he so proudly wore would soon be the very thing pulling him into court. By 11:46 p.m., the clip aired on a late-night news show. No commentary, no dramatic voiceovers, just footage, just a moment, just a woman kicked to the ground and standing again. At 2:37 a.m., Rosa received a message from a reporter she hadn't seen in 15 years. A name she recognized from a corruption trial long ago, one of the few journalists who didn't flinch when threats came. The message was plain. They need to know who you are, and why you didn't stay down. Rosa looked at it for a long moment. Then she reached for the desk lamp and flicked it on, pulled out a yellow legal pad, and began to write not a speech, not a rebuttal, not a manifesto, a record. Because too many stories like hers never make it into history books. They get buried in file drawers and buried deeper by time. But not this one. This one would be written by the woman who lived it, and this time, no one was going to erase her name. By the next morning, Rosa Franklin's name was on every major outlet. News anchors called it a moment that captured America's conscience. Social media dubbed her the woman who got up. But while the world was reacting, Rosa was acting. She didn't care for the spotlight. Never had. Let others chase soundbite as chased facts. And right now, facts were the only thing she trusted. Because behind that kick behind Malloy's smirk and the town's suspicious silence edge smelled something deeper, something rotting behind fresh paint. The coffee pot bubbled. She poured a mug, sat at the same worn table where she once read trial briefs, and opened a drawer she hadn't touched since her resignation. Inside were file boxes. No years. No case numbers. Just names. Victims. People whose stories had almost disappeared. But Rosa kept them. Because she always knew the real records weren't the ones stamped and filed. They were the ones buried on purpose. She flipped open a box marked Suppressed Testimony. Folders cracked at the edges. Handwritten notes curled from age. One stood out. Jerome Bell. Traffic stop. Arrested. Hospitalized. Charges dropped. No one followed up. All within the same county Malloy called his turf. Another. Tasha Reeve. 7 months pregnant. Resisted arrest, the report claimed. Lost her child weeks later. No body cam footage released. Guess who signed the report? Malloy, and then another. A high school junior. Publicly humiliated during a false shoplifting claim. Charges vanished. So did he. Moved out of state. No forwarding record. Rosa's fingers traced each name. Her mind, trained by decades of cross-examinations and hidden motives, began connecting the dots. The same county, the same office, the same pattern. She turned to her laptop and began to dig. Public records, complaints, settlement logs. Most were sealed, but a few entries hadn't been fully scrubbed. Dispatch summaries, timestamp mismatches, witness statements lost in transit. Each omission was a clue. And then she saw an old memo, barely visible in the corner of a scanned PDF, written in 10-point font. Reviewed and closed by County Supervisor E.D. Elaine Durham. Rosa froze. She remembered that name. Durham once testified in a public ethics hearing over a suspicious equipment procurement deal. On paper, she'd seemed professional, composed. But Rosa had sat on that bench, had watched Durham flinch when asked about her husband's company, a private security firm that, at the time, had been quietly absorbing contracts from struggling counties' contracts for holding cells, patrol equipment, and operational support. Rosa pulled corporate records. The firm's name, Keystone Regional. Innocuous, almost forgettable. But the trail wasn't. Keystone had received over $4 million in contracts from counties where complaints against police were frequently closed without action. Rosa cross-checked campaign finance records. 2 obscure political action committees had quietly funneled donations to Sheriff Malloy's re-election fund donations traced back to Keystone's executive board. It all came together like scaffolding around a collapsing house. Keystone funded the system. Durham closed the files. Malloy enforced the silence. It wasn't an accident. It was a design, a triangle of control, stitched together with money, silence, and intimidation. She printed everything: meeting minutes, financial filings, campaign reports, spread them across the dining table. The same table where she once sat with grieving parents, with whistleblowers too scared to speak on record. It was covered now with cold facts that screamed louder than headlines. And then she made a call. Isaiah Boone. His name wouldn't mean much to the public, but inside legal circles, Boone was the kind of man who had no interest in being seen, only in seeing everything. A former police auditor, medically retired, after what official records called a mistaken raid. Rosa knew the truth. He'd been set up, framed by officers he was investigating. She'd testified for him in a closed-door Senate hearing. He never forgot. She didn't offer pleasantries. Just 3 words. I need you. He arrived that evening, wearing the same threadbare coat he always wore when he was working, not just investigating, but hunting. They barely exchanged greetings. He sat down, rolled up his sleeves, and started flipping through the papers. His jaw clenched tighter with each page. When he got to the campaign funding loop Keystone to pack to Malloy, he looked up. This isn't corruption, he said. This is infrastructure. They worked in silence. Rosa called it mapping. Boone called it exposing the spine. They tracked over 20 redacted cases, false arrests, settlements, intimidational in a 5-county radius, all signed off by Durham or one of her deputies. Multiple cases had missing body cam footage. Others had none at all. But what unnerved them both the most was how thorough the erasure had been. Witnesses had moved states. Families had gone silent. Lawsuits settled quietly under non-disclosure orders. A teacher who'd once testified publicly now had no social media, no school employment records. A mother who'd spoken out lost custody of her son after an anonymous report claimed neglect. They weren't just covering up mistakes. They were rewriting people's lives. They're erasing resistance, Rosa said quietly. Boone nodded. And you? You just became the one they can't erase. She didn't reply. She was already writing, pens scratching across the paper with the force of intention. She wasn't drafting an article. She wasn't scripting a press statement. She was documenting the truth before someone else got a chance to distort it. She knew how this worked. Malloy wouldn't panic yet. Durham wouldn't feel threatened. Keystone had lawyers, lobbyists, and layers of protection. But what they didn't expect, what they never accounted for, was someone like her. Someone who'd already walked away from power and had nothing left to lose but her name. And Rosa wasn't about to let them take that. Because when silence becomes policy, someone has to break it with facts. And facts were her specialty. The next strike didn't come with a headline. It came at 3:14 a.m., wrapped in the kind of silence that only shows up when someone doesn't want to be seen. A thud on Rosa's porch. Not a knock. Not a visitor. A message. She opened the front door barefoot, robe tied at the waist, coffee only half brewed in the kitchen. There, on the top step, sat a dead bird. Its wings clipped, its body arranged like someone had taken time to send a statement without using a single word. The feathers looked too clean, too perfect, like someone had done this before. She stared at it, not with fear but recognition. She'd seen this kind of tactic once in Baltimore. Another time in St. Louis. Always the same message. We see you. We know where you live. You don't belong here. But Rosa wasn't 27 anymore. She wasn't just learning how power moved, she knew now. And that made her dangerous. Later that morning, her mailbox was torn off the post. Not a car accident, not a storm. It had been ripped off deliberately, screws still half buried in the gravel. Spray paint bled across the side of her fence. "This isn't your court anymore." Red letters, uneven strokes, still dripping. Rosa stood in the middle of her gravel driveway, sun rising behind her, shadows stretching long like the fingers of old ghosts. She didn't call 911. She didn't call the sheriff. She just took a long breath, then swept the bird away with a flat shovel and poured cold hose water over the graffiti until the red thinned and the wood showed through again. That afternoon, Boone returned with a worn suitcase and a folder thick enough to slam shut a courtroom. He didn't ask what had happened. He saw the bent mailbox, the paint-stained fence. He only said one thing: time to lock in. They converted the dining room into what Boone called a quiet ops room. 2 laptops, 3 external drives, a small corkboard, and stacks hundred soft documents, color-coded and tagged. Rosa's entire house began to feel like a living case file. She brewed coffee. He rewired the network. At 4:03 p.m., Boone handed Rosa a highlighter and pointed to a line on a document. It was an audit list from 5 years ago. 16 officers, all transferred quietly between departments. Each had unresolved incidents attached to their names: one accused of choking a suspect during a wellness check, another who tasered a deaf teenager for non-compliance. Not one of those officers had been charged. All of them, without exception, were approved for transfer by the same office, Elaine Durham's. At 6:12 p.m., Rosa received her first envelope, no return address. Inside was a printed photo, her caught mid-fall, legs bent, hands scraping the ground, the exact frame pulled from the gas station video. Someone had taken the time to isolate the worst second of her life and mail it to her like a postcard. No words, no threats, just silence and the image of her being brought low. Boone studied the envelope under a UV light. No prints. The corner had been clipped and re-glued. A pro job, but still he smirked. "They're getting sloppy," he said. "You don't send trophies unless you're scared." Rosa didn't speak. She just taped the photo to the wall, right above the list of names. Fear wasn't what they wanted anymore. They wanted her humiliated. But humiliation only works if the person on the other side believes they've lost. And Rosa had nothing left to lose. That night, she pulled an old external drive from storage, password encrypted, labeled "Dead Files." Inside was a report she'd written but never published, 6 years ago, about a school cop named Decker who used a taser on a 14-year-old for loitering near a classroom. The student had epilepsy. There was no footage, no consequences. Decker was later promoted, then reassigned to Sheriff Malloy's department. Rosa dug deeper into the school records. The principal who had signed off on Decker's internal review? Elaine Durham's cousin. The loop tightened. The deeper Rosa went, the more she felt like she wasn't uncovering something new but something old. Something built over decades. Carefully, intentionally, and quietly. Like a bad foundation buried beneath layers of white paint and "Thank you for your service" yard signs. At 2:37 a.m., her power flickered. The lights dimmed, then shut off. Her laptop rebooted on its own, and the router began blinking in a rhythm that Boone didn't like one bit. They unplugged everything, shut down Wi-Fi, switched to battery backups and encrypted flash storage. They knew what this was. Digital surveillance. Someone wasn't just watching them now. Someone was inside. Boone leaned back in his chair. "They're trying to see what we know." Rosa didn't panic. She stood, walked to the window, and stared into the dark trees lining her property. They were still. Not a breeze, not a sound. "I think we're almost there," she whispered. At 5:22 a.m., she sent a secure message to the only person outside her circle she still trusted, a federal archivist named Marla Timmons. Years ago, Rosa and Marla had served together on a judicial ethics review board. Marla was quiet, loyal, and the kind of person who never stopped watching even after the news cycle moved on. Rosa's message was only 12 words. "I have the map. We need to protect the pieces. Trust only print. Marla's reply came 1 hour later. I've got the vault. Send what you can. Quiet channel only. Later that morning, Boone left to pick up toner and paper from the general store. He was gone just 23 minutes. When he returned, 2 of his tires were slashed. 4 clean incisions, straight cuts, like someone had brought tools, not rage. This wasn't vandalism, it was escalation. That evening, they switched everything. No more networks, no more cloud storage, only hard copies, only encrypted drives, paper, ink, locked cabinets, and backup power. It felt like war again, but this time, Rosa wasn't hiding in the trenches. She was walking directly into the storm, not to burn the system down, but to finally name it out loud and hold up the match. By the end of that week, Rosa's house didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a headquarters in the middle of nowhere. The kind of place where revolutions didn't begin, but where they were mapped out quietly, one paper cut at a time. Every flat surface was covered. Printer heat warped the edges of documents. Sticky notes littered windowsills like leaves, and coded phrases in Boone's small, sharp handwriting crawled across the whiteboard in spiraling connections. They barely slept. When they did, it was in shifts. Rosa napped in the armchair by the front window, a legal pad always open in her lap. Boone rested on the couch, one foot always on the floor. A hand never far from the encrypted drives zipped into a canvas bag that had seen more than one raid. At 3:12 a.m. on a Saturday, Boone jerked upright with a gasp. Sweat clung to his collar. He didn't say what he'd dreamed, didn't need to. Rosa passed him a glass of water without looking up. He nodded, once the kind of nod soldiers share when language feels insulting. An hour later, headlights cut through the trees. A car didn't stop at the house, just passed. Slow. Like it knew something. By dawn, a package was on the porch. Plain cardboard. No stamps, no name, just a symbol drawn in black marker on the flap of a small lantern. Rosa's fingers tensed around the edge. Boone recognized it too. Lantern. They'd only seen that mark twice before. Once during a procurement scandal in Baton Rouge, where a private firm funneled security funds into election campaigns. The second time, during a federal cover-up involving a retired prison warden whose abuses were buried under layers of misfiled logs. In both cases, someone had sent data. No sender, no message. Just facts that spoke louder than any whistle ever could. Rosa opened the box carefully. Inside, a flash drive. Unmarked. Metal casing. Cold as steel. She didn't plug it in right away. First, she just held it between her palms like weighing a piece of truth before deciding what to do with it. Then she moved. She booted up the isolated laptop, the one not connected to anything but the air around it. Boone closed the curtains, dimmed the lights. The drive loaded instantly. No password, no labels, just a single spreadsheet. 3 columns. Vendor name, payment amount, origin account. At first, it looked like another donation ledger. But then Rosa saw the names. Keystone Regional, Valor Reform PAC, and then typed in clean sans serif font Senator Everett Grayson. Boone's jaw locked. Grayson was a nationally known figure, a loud advocate for security expansion, always on the Sunday shows, leaning on a southern drawl and a flag pin so bright it made cameras flare. He wore moderation like armor and peddled fear like gospel. The spreadsheet detailed over $90,000 in payments routed from Valor Reform through a shell entity labeled Strategic Media, then quietly deposited into Grayson's re-election fund. The category? Media outreach. But Rosa had already searched every ad-buy database. No local commercials, no flyers, no canvassers. She opened federal expenditure reports. Nothing matched. Which meant one thing: hidden money. She leaned back, letting the cold hit her spine. This isn't just corruption, she said. This is engineering. It wasn't just about covering up police brutality. It was about financing it. Boone cross-referenced the shell company's registration, registered to an abandoned office in Dayton, Ohio. The listed agent? A former legislative staffer tied to 2 PACs, both of which had received large consulting donations from Keystone the year before. And at the bottom of the file, a single entry that made Rosa's blood still in her veins. Susher, Ling, from Keystone Regional directly into a sheriff's department training grant. Signed by L. Ruins. The name rang like a hammer strike. Elijah Rones had been a quiet player during Rosa's time on the bench, a behind-the-scenes DOJ consultant, later moved into private operations. He now sat on the board of a tactical training firm that supplied equipment, curriculum, and advanced riot suppression packages to small-town departments, including Malloy's A Doppel. She opened an old court memo and found his signature on a use-of-force audit for rural departments in 3 southern states. Everything connected. Grayson funded Valor. Valor cleaned and masked the payment. Keystone provided equipment and legal covers. Rones designed the operational model. Durham sanitized the public records. Malloy enforced it on the ground. It was a pipeline, and Rosa had just stepped on the valve. She stared at the screen. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, itching to send it all out to news outlets, to DOJ contacts, to anyone who would listen. But then Boone said the one thing she needed to hear. Too soon, and they'll drown it in spin. She exhaled. We need the fracture point. We need to make it undeniable. That night, Rosa drafted what she called the skeleton. A printed diagram, simple and stark. No speculation, just financial flows, legal names, connections backed by filings, signatures, timestamps. She labeled each node in red ink. Legible, she said, so no one can pretend they didn't understand. Boone added copies of court summaries, scanned audits, campaign contribution records. Rosa insisted they strip it all of emotion. If they think it's about how I felt, they'll debate it for weeks. If it's about what they did, they won't have time to breathe. At midnight, they encrypted the full file 3 ways and saved it to drives hidden in 3 different counties. One in a safe deposit box, one in a private vault held under a non-profit's trust, and one taped to the underside of an old piano in Rosa's brother's garage 2 states away. They weren't just collecting evidence anymore. They were preparing for war, not the kind with guns and slogans. The kind that takes place in rooms full of powerful men who smile in public and sign death warrants in private. And Rosa was going to walk into that room holding the one thing they'd never expected: documentation. The turning point didn't come with a gavel, or a courtroom ruling, or a headline ticker on cable news. It came with a microphone, not the polished kind clipped to a blazer or held by a seasoned journalist. Number. This one was duct-taped to a bent podium at the back of West County Fellowship Hall, a place where truth usually came in the form of casseroles and shared prayers. The room was plain. Low ceilings, buzzing fluorescent lights, creaky tile floors that had seen 1,000 potlucks and retirement announcements. A crooked American flag hung in one corner beside a dusty, upright piano. No cameras, no press. Just folding chairs lined up in uneven rows. But tonight, every seat was full. There were teachers, crossing guards, mechanics, a mother with her child asleep in her lap, 2 veterans in faded denim jackets, an elderly man who looked like he hadn't left his porch in months. People who normally passed each other in silence were now shoulder to shoulder, and they were there because something inside them had been disturbed. The video of Rosa's assault had become more than a clip. It had become a trigger. Rosa didn't come to speak. She came to listen. She sat in the 3rd row, near the edge of the aisle, wearing a plain black sweater and soft shoes. Her hair pulled back tight. No badge, no name tag, no ceremony. She just wanted to hear what her silence had stirred. At first, no one spoke. It took a while. These weren't people used to saying things out loud. Then a young woman stood. Her voice cracked before the first word came out. She said her brother had been pulled over 3 times in 1 month. Last time, they cuffed him and never told her why. He was never charged. Still has a limp in his left wrist. Then a man, maybe mid-50s, a bus driver, said he once saw a sheriff's deputy slam a teenager against a wall for skateboarding. I reported it, he said. Principal told me to keep it to myself. Said the boy had a record. He was 15. Then came more. A retired nurse talked about a neighbor whose son disappeared for 2 days after a traffic stop. No record, no calls. He came home bruised and silent. A custodian from the school board said files went missing all the time. Names vanished from logs. Cameras that were accidentally turned off. Even a woman who once worked inside the sheriff's office stood up. She said she quit because the files never matched the stories. They would ask me to shred things, she said. No one ever said it out loud, but we all knew what we were doing. Rosa listened with her eyes closed, not out of fatigue but to hear with every part of herself, every breath, every tremble in those voices. Then, without cue, someone called her name, soft at first, then again firmer. "Miss Franklin, would you like to say something?" She opened her eyes. The room had stilled. Even the old fan in the corner seemed to quiet itself. She stood slowly, not for drama, but with purpose. As if every bone in her body understood the weight of what it meant to rise again. She walked to the front and placed one hand on the podium. The mic squealed softly, then settled. "I wasn't supposed to be part of this," she began, her voice low, worn, but steady. "I came here tonight to listen. Because the truth is, we've all been standing in the same storm." There was a pause. Not silence, stillness. She went on. "They kicked me because they thought I didn't matter. Because they thought I was alone. But they didn't realize I was one of many. They didn't realize how many of you had already been pushed, or watched someone get pushed, and kept that pain tucked in your throat for years." Heads nodded. She opened her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. The diagram. The skeleton. She laid it out on the podium and flattened the creases with her palms. "This," she said, her finger tracing the red lines, "isn't a theory. It's not a speech. It's a map. It shows where the money went, who signed what, who got rich, who disappeared, and who kept it going." A man in the back, hands clasped on his knees, cleared his throat. "So what do we do?" Rosa turned to him not with instruction, but with inclusion. "You do what they never expect. You show up. You ask for things in writing. You go to meetings they think you'll skip. You ask for copies of budgets, contracts, footage. You don't yell. You record. You don't burn anything. You document." Another voice quiet, from the second row. "Will it matter?" She nodded without hesitation. "It already does." Someone else whispered, "They'll come for you." She smiled, the kind of smile that didn't blink. "They already did, and I'm still standing." There was no applause, no chants, just breath, collective breath, like a room exhaling after holding pain too long. When the meeting ended, and people began folding chairs and hugging strangers, a teenager lingered behind. Rosa noticed him standing alone near the piano. He approached, slowly, didn't speak, just handed her a piece of paper, folded small. She took it, opened it carefully, a sketch drawn in pencil, rough but detailed. It was her, standing upright, hair blowing in the wind, not bleeding, not bent, just tall. At the bottom, 3 words, in uneven handwriting. "Thank you, ma'am." She folded the paper like a sworn affidavit, because that night, she didn't just speak, she testified. The backlash didn't take long. It never does when truth starts making noise. Within 48 hours of Rosa's quiet, powerful appearance at the community hall, the smear machine started humming. But it didn't come from where people expected. Not from the sheriff's office. That would have been too obvious, too blunt. No, this came from somewhere slicker, sharper. The kind of operation that doesn't just aim to silence you, aims to erase the version of you people want to believe in. First, an op-ed appeared in the Sunday edition of a local paper. "Former judge's troubling history raises questions," the headline read. No author listed, just the cold, distancing byline, "Contributed opinion." The article dusted off a 12-year-old ethics review Rosa had faced during her time on the bench, an internal complaint she'd been fully cleared of after an investigation and unanimous vote. But the piece didn't mention that part. It cherry-picked phrases. It twisted context. It quoted unnamed court insiders who described her as emotionally reactive and difficult to supervise. The damage wasn't in the details, it was in the headline. People read headlines. They don't read footnotes. By noon, a regional television anchor was reporting that Rosa's past conduct is raising serious concerns. The anchor smiled through the segment, polished teeth, scripted suspicion. Is this retired judge using a personal vendetta to incite distrust in law enforcement? He asked. Then came the cable news pundits. They flashed the same photo Rosa, frozen mid-speech at the town hall, diagram in hand under banners like politicizing pain and the dangers of false heroes. Social media took it from there. Accounts began posting grainy screenshots of Rosa walking alone at night, as if that meant something. A Facebook group called Protect Our Officers claimed Rosa had ties to anti-police organizations, citing nothing, just assuming the lie would find legs. Even people Rosa knew started backing away. A former law clerk posted a vague status update. Sometimes the people we looked up to weren't who we thought. A college where she'd once lectured canceled a guest appearance. Due to community discomfort, the email read. An old friend from church stopped responding to her texts entirely. Boone watched it all unfold from the corner of the room, seated beneath a corkboard covered in red string and printed ledgers. He didn't blink, just quietly closed his laptop and said, Phase 2. Discredit. Destroy. Disappear. Rosa nodded. They're playing from the manual. When the facts start cutting too close, smear the one holding the blade. She walked to the wall where the skeleton still hung her diagram of connections between money, policy, and power. Her fingers tapped on a square labeled Judge Preston Kane. Kane had once been a friend. They'd presided over ethics panels together, shared notes on judicial independence. He used to call her the most stubborn moral compass he ever met. His name now appeared tied to a political action committee laundering money through valor reform. She didn't want to believe it. But the paperwork didn't lie. She picked up the phone. He answered on the second ring. Rosa, he said. Like he already knew why she was calling. I'm going to ask you something once, she said evenly. Did you authorize the release of that ethics file? A pause. Not long, but long enough. I didn't leak it, he said. But I didn't stop it either. That's the same thing. It's called surviving. Rosa closed her eyes, not out of rage but clarity. You owe me nothing, she said. But you owe the truth more than this. She hung up. The next morning, Boone dropped a new folder on the table. It was a bot analysis report. Fake social media accounts had spiked within hours of the op-ed, pushing hashtags like #NotHerStory and #JudgeInQuestion. Dozens of accounts created the same week, identical language, coordinated. He pointed to a name, the digital marketing firm, managing the Sheriff's Department grant program. They were behind the push. Professional disinformation. Boone didn't have to say anything. Rosa stood, walked to her old filing cabinet, and pulled out the original ethics report clean, cleared, and signed by every member of the Judicial Review Board. She scanned the full document into a PDF, added a cover note that simply read, "Full record enclosed, unanimously cleared, no redactions." Then she sent it directly to every journalist, editor, and commentator who had so much as tweeted her name. No press release. No defense, just truth. It took 12 hours. An independent outlet published the full report with a headline that read, "What They Don't Want You to Know About Rosa Franklin." It went viral. Then came the shift. The mural downtown changed overnight. What began as a simple stencil of her silhouette became a full-length painting. Rosa standing upright, face calm, surrounded by names Jerome Bell, Tasha Reeve, Elijah Ronzaveri victim her research had unearthed. Someone had written in chalk below it. They kicked her down. She kicked the door open. Even strangers began reaching out. A teacher in Mississippi sent a letter. "Your story reminded me why I document everything." A former court reporter sent scanned transcripts from a trial where a judge dismissed evidence she now believed had been buried. Rosa read each message slowly, not with triumph, but with reverence. Because she knew what was happening. They had tried to erase her, and she'd answered not with shouting, but with receipts. She walked into the storm not to fight for herself, but for every voice that had been wiped from record, every name misfiled into silence. And now, her truth wasn't just surviving, it was multiplying. It happened at night. Of course it did. These kinds of men always show up when they think the world isn't watching. The wind had picked up just before it started, branches brushing against Rosa's windows like warnings. She'd just finished marking red ink across a packet of legal drafts when the floodlight over the back porch blinked. Once, then twice, then off. Boone didn't speak. He didn't have to. He slid open the drawer by the wall, pulled out the narrow metal box, and entered the code to unlock the gun's safe. They didn't panic. They prepared. Rosa hit the kill switch on the home server. The lights dimmed, humming down into silence. All files encrypted, backups disconnected. She slipped 2 flash drives into the inner pocket of her coat. One labeled Skeleton, the other Witness Logs. They'd rehearsed this. They'd always known it might come. By the time the first figure crossed the back fence line, Boone was already upstairs, crouched low in the guest bedroom window, watching. 3 shadows. No flashlights, no uniforms, just dark clothes, covered faces, soft boots pressing into the dirt like they'd done this before, military posture, quiet intent. But this wasn't just any house, and Rosa Franklin wasn't just any woman. The back door creaked once before swinging open unlocked. Rosa had left it that way. She sat in the living room, back straight, hands clasped, as if presiding over her own courtroom. The first man entered without hesitation, stepped toward her, and grabbed her arm. The second hovered near the door, muttering the word search warrant, but he never showed one. Rosa didn't ask. She already knew it didn't exist. The third moved toward Boone's desk, his gloves already on, reaching for the files. What none of them saw were the cameras. 4 of them, hidden, motion activated. Connected to a silent, secure upload system Rosa and Boone had installed 3 weeks earlier. The footage streamed off-site, encrypted and timed to ping a law firm in D.C. if interrupted. They thought they were ghosts in the dark, but they were on record. Boone came down the stairs, slow and steady, hands visible. "You don't belong here," he said, voice calm. Low. "You're not law. You're trespass." One of them shoved him against the wall. He didn't resist. They wanted chaos. They wanted a scene. Rosa knew it. So she didn't scream, didn't struggle. She looked the first man in the eye. The one gripping her wristband said softly, "You picked the wrong house." He grinned. Then he heard it. Sirens. Low at first, then building. Sharp. Precise. Not local. Federal. 3 black SUVs barreled up the gravel road, kicking dust into the air like a rising storm. Marshals, armed, trained, badges visible, guns drawn. The 3 intruders froze. Boone stepped aside as 2 officers entered and took control of the room with terrifying efficiency. "Hands where we can see them. Down, now!" 9 minutes later, it was over. The 3 intruders, cuffed and unmasked. No one spoke. No one resisted. They didn't dare. The marshals swept the house, confirmed identities, secured the area. Boone handed over the flash drives. Rosa provided the motion capture files. Every second time stamped, logged, uploaded. The footage leaked to national outlets by sunrise. Headlines followed within hours. Breaking: attempted intimidation at Rosa Franklin's home caught on federal camera. Unmasked: the men who tried to silence Rosa Franklin. The same networks that had once questioned her character were now begging for a statement. Rosa gave none. She didn't need to speak. The footage did it for her. In the aftermath, she filed an emergency motion injunction requesting formal investigation into coordinated efforts to harass, intimidate, and endanger a federal witness. She was technically retired, yes, but her work was protected under whistleblower provisions. And it was enough. Enough to trigger oversight. Enough to wake up the system. Within 72 hours, subpoenas were issued, depositions scheduled, and names were named. One of the masked intruders turned out to be a suspended deputy from a neighboring county. His disciplinary record had been sealed until that day. The second? A contractor affiliated with a private tactical firm owned by Elijah Rowans. The third? A former Keystone Regional employee, terminated 2 years ago. now working under the table for Valor Reform's so-called Security Compliance Division. 3 men, 3 institutions, all pointing in the same direction. It wasn't random. It was a directive. A signal sent from higher up and now dragged into the light. Rosa didn't celebrate. She didn't hold a press conference. She didn't raise her voice. She printed out the affidavits, 3 new ones. She clipped them into her growing binder, its label, handwritten in thick black marker. Retaliation. She placed it on the same shelf that held skeleton, audit trails, and false confessions. Because she wasn't chasing justice for herself anymore. She was building the archive. One day, she knew, someone younger, someone watching now, would need a map through the same storm. And when they reached for answers, they wouldn't find opinion pieces or half-told stories. They'd find evidence. Cold. Precise. Undeniable. For the first time in years, the machine that once operated in shadow-clean hands, polished shoes, invisible order-shad faces. And now those faces were being booked. By morning, Rosa received a letter. Typed. Formal. From a staffer in a Senate subcommittee. It read, "We would like to formally request your records in preparation for oversight hearings." Boone read it twice. "They're going to put this on the floor." Rosa nodded. "And I'll give them the receipts." Because the men who broke in that night didn't come for files. They came to erase a woman. But all they did was confirm her story. And she had the footage to prove it. The courthouse wasn't unfamiliar to Rosa. She'd spent half her life walking these corridors, hearing footsteps echo like memory, reading faces as carefully as legal briefs. But this time, she wasn't a judge. Not a witness. Not even a victim. She was something else entirely. A reckoning. The gallery was packed, not just with reporters or curious passers-by, but with people who had been waiting for years for the system to say something different than, "We regret to inform you." There were folding chairs added to the back rows, a line around the block. Cell phones silenced, eyes alert. The courtroom buzzed without sound. Outside, news cameras waited like crows. Inside, silence ruled. Rosa entered with Boone at her side. He wore the same black coat he'd worn when they uncovered the first PAC payment. She carried her binder thick now, worn at the spine, with tabs peeking out like flags at half-mast. Its label was handwritten, simple, sharp. Record. The judge presiding over the hearing was young, younger than Rosa had expected, but his eyes were older than his suit, tired from too many nights reviewing too many pages that were never meant to be seen. He looked at Rosa with the same expression she once wore on the bench-guarded hope. This wasn't a criminal trial. Not yet. It was a federal evidentiary hearing, one meant to decide if there was sufficient cause to move forward with criminal investigation into a tri-county network involving the sheriff's office, several contractors, political action committees, and 3 key individuals. The hearing was public, by Rosa's request. The first hour went as expected. The prosecutor outlined the charges: unlawful entry, intent to intimidate, coordination between suspended law enforcement officers and private contractors with direct ties to federal grant money. Then came the defense. They didn't dispute the video. They couldn't. Instead, they attacked the context. "She's not a federal employee," their lead attorney said. "She's a private citizen with political motives, a retired judge looking to stay relevant." Rosa didn't blink, but Boone shifted. The defense continued, painting Rosa as someone with a history of ethical reviews, trying to frame her motion for investigation as personal vengeance cloaked in policy. And that's when Rosa stood. There was no dramatic gasp, just a room inhaling at once. The judge looked to her. "You may approach," he said. She did slowly, but without hesitation. She wore no robe, no name tag, no title on her chest. Just clarity in her step and a binder in her hands. She opened to Exhibit 14, her clearance certificate, signed, dated 2 years ago, proof of her official role as a consultant to a federal oversight panel on civil liberties and ethics in law enforcement, active, ongoing, fully documented. She looked at the defense, not with anger, with precision. "You don't need to sit behind a bench to serve justice," she said. "You just need the facts and the will to speak them aloud." She turned to the judge. I am here not because of what they did to me, but because of what they were trying to do to all of us. They came into my home to destroy the evidence I'd gathered, to erase a voice, not mine alone, but every one of the names tied to those contracts, those budgets, those voided reports. She placed the binder on the table. These are not allegations. They are audits. They are receipts. They are time-stamped, notarized, and archived. She paused. They are yours now. Then she stepped back. No raised voice. No theatrics. Just documentation. The judge didn't rush. He flipped through the binder silently. The room watched each page turn like it was the next chapter in a long-denied story. Finally, he closed the folder gently, adjusted his glasses, and leaned forward. The court finds sufficient cause to move forward with full federal review. A breath escaped the gallery like air escaping lungs too long collapsed. No cheers, no clapping, just quiet relief. Because the system hadn't turned away. This time, it stepped forward. The session ended. Reporters leapt from their benches, shouting questions as Rosa exited through the front doors. She said nothing. Boone guided her down the steps, the binder still clutched tight in her hand, her face unreadable. But something had shifted. That evening, the mural downtown changed again. Overnight, it now showed Rosa standing in a courtroom not behind the bench, but in front of it. The binder open in her hands, red lines glowing like veins of truth, connecting every figure in the background. A deputy, a politician, a judge. And beneath her painted image, someone had scrawled in bold white strokes. She didn't shout, she documented. Later that night, Rosa sat alone at her table. The house was quiet again, but not hollow. Her phone buzzed once, a message from a young paralegal in Washington. I'm studying your record tonight. We've never been taught this part in law school. Thank you. She smiled, folded the phone shut, then opened a new binder. Fresh tabs, new labels, because this wasn't over, not even close. 3 days after the federal hearing, Rosa received a letter. It wasn't an email. It wasn't a phone call. It was hand-delivered, heavy cardstock, gold-embossed seal, Office of Congressional Oversight. They were launching a full investigation, not just into the sheriff's department, but into every financial corridor Rosa had mapped. Keystone Regional, Valor Reform PAC, the Law Enforcement Grant Fund, and even the office of Senator Everett Grayson. It was happening. What began as a quiet stop at a gas station had turned into a political earthquake. Boone read the letter twice, leaning against the doorway, eyebrows drawn tight. This is going to be bigger than you planned. Rosa didn't look up. She just kept typing. I didn't plan this, she said. I documented it. Outside, the autumn wind picked up. Orange leaves scattered across her porch like witnesses rushing to testify. Inside, Rosa and Boone switched to stricter protocols. Air-gapped systems only. Flash drives written once, then physically secured. Every new document printed and logged by hand. That night, Rosa's encrypted email account received over 30 login attempts, from 7 different IP addresses. She didn't flinch. She just closed the laptop and retrieved the offline logs stored beneath a false bottom drawer in her study, the ones not even Boone had full access to. Then she made 3 new copies and mailed them separately to 3 different legal contacts in 3 different states. Insurance, she said softly. Boone nodded. The walls were tightening, but so were their defenses. By the next morning, media coverage had shifted. What had once been called a lone judge's crusade was now a top story on every major network. A Sunday morning anchor, known for his centrism, opened with, Rosa Franklin didn't start this fire, but she may be the first person to hold a match up to the smoke. Editorials followed. She didn't torch the system. She spotlighted its rot. Accountability has a new archivist, and people began to respond not just with opinions, but with evidence. Mail started arriving daily. Brown envelopes, manila folders, torn notebooks. Inside were arrest records, personnel reviews, letters of complaint that had been ignored or returned undeliverable. One envelope contained a single photograph of a teenage boy. On the back, a note. He didn't make it. They said he resisted. I don't believe them. Please make them remember his name. Rosa added his name to a folder. Not victims, not cases, just his name. Because every page had a pulse now. Every paperclip held someone's life. And as the archive grew, so did the resistance. Senator Grayson finally broke his silence. He called the inquiry a distraction orchestrated by political extremists. He claimed Rosa was being manipulated by activist operatives. But 2 days later, a whistleblower released internal emails from Grayson's office. In one, a senior aide wrote, "We need to steer the narrative. Paint her as angry, emotional, defensive. The public trusts authority. Lean into that." It was dated the day after Rosa's testimony. The story exploded. Cable news anchors backpedaled. Lawmakers distanced themselves. Grayson canceled all public appearances. Elijah Rones, once the architect of multiple private training contracts, resigned from the board of his firm with no comment. Elaine Durham went silent. Sheriff Malloy, subpoenaed for the second time. And Rosa? She said nothing. No interviews, no press tour, no podiums. She stayed at her table, binder open, pen steady. Boone called it a people's archive. It wasn't made for headlines. It was made for history. When Rosa was invited to testify before Congress, she declined. Instead, she submitted a written statement. 6 pages. Tight prose. Clear logic. It read, "Power that fears questions is not power worth preserving." What I witnessed was not chaos but choreography, a dance between profit and silence. If you want to fix it, don't ask me what I felt. Ask what they signed. Ask who approved the contracts. Ask who benefited. Then ask why no one asked before. When the statement was read aloud on Capitol Hill, the room held its breath. Even her former critics didn't interrupt. Because you can argue emotion, but you can't argue math. That evening, Rosa and Boone sat in silence. The wind howled through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang. He turned to her and asked, "Do you think they'll actually change anything?" She looked up from her notes. "That's not my job." "What is your job then?" "To make sure they don't get to lie about what happened." Boone smiled. "Well, you're doing it." For the first time in weeks, Rosa allowed herself a walk. No binder, no phone, just wind and sky and gravel under her feet. She passed a mural she hadn't seen before, one not painted by professionals. It was rough, colorful, a little uneven. Her face was there, not the viral one, not the courtroom one, just her older, tired, real. Above her image, in spray-painted red, a quote she never said. She made truth louder than their fear. She stood there for a while, reading, breathing, and then, finally, she smiled, just a little, then turned and kept walking. They called it the audit, but Rosa knew what it really was, a reckoning. The federal task force hadn't made headlines when it formed. It moved like a shadow, at first quiet subpoenas, sealed interviews, internal memos without names. But the moment its existence was confirmed, the story broke open like a dam. 12 members, 2 federal prosecutors, a team of forensic accountants, 3 civil rights lawyers, 1 retired Judge Rosa had mentored 20 years earlier, and an analyst who used to read Rosa's case notes back when she published anonymous essays about ethical gaps in the judicial system. Now they were quoting her work aloud in conference rooms, as if it were legal doctrine. They weren't just reviewing the sheriff's department anymore. They were reviewing the infrastructure of silence, the contracts, the transfers, the training modules supplied by Rowan's firm, the fundraising circuits connected to Valor Reform, every dotted line between enforcement and enrichment. And behind almost every corrupted file was the faint trace of a name Rosa had already underlined. Boone set up his own command center, not in their house, too risky now, but in a borrowed backroom of a library. He brought in a printer, a portable scanner, 3 legal pads, and a wall calendar. He marked it up in colors: red for fatal encounters, orange for settlements labeled nuisance, yellow for fake training invoices, green for PAC donations that vanished after being transferred through shell firms. The red days outnumbered the rest. A lot more. It was a system built on statistics no one wanted to admit were people. Every time Rosa opened a new file, she found another omission. Another complaint marked incomplete. Another officer who transferred quietly with a glowing letter of recommendation signed by someone already under federal review. The further they looked, the older it got. 15 years. 20. One private firm had been quietly recycling surveillance tech, originally built for overseas operations, selling it to local police departments under the guise of community safety. They found evidence that certain departments were incentivized to increase traffic stops during election years because citations helped boost public perception of order. They uncovered a program that ranked towns by their compliance improvement rates. The higher your use of force numbers, the more grant money you got the next year. It wasn't just abuse, it was strategy. Rosa watched it unfold like a trial with no courtroom, just receipts. But something else happened, too. People began to talk. First, a deputy, then a council member, then a judge. Men and women who had stayed quiet for years, some out of fear, others out of loyalty, some who genuinely hadn't known what they were part of until Rosa showed them the blueprint. One former city clerk came forward, with a ledger hidden inside a false bottom drawer, notes she'd kept in case she ever needed to tell the real story. A police officer from a small town admitted to being ordered not to activate his body cam during routine deterrence operations. They weren't confessing to Rosa. They were confessing because she had gone first, because someone had broken the silence without demanding the spotlight. Rosa turned down every offer for a primetime interview, every podcast invitation, every magazine cover. She told Boone one evening, as they watched the newsroll footage of marshals raiding the Valor Reform Office, "This was never about making noise, it was about making a record." Boone smiled. Well, the record just shook the whole house. The Oversight Committee issued a preliminary report, 312 pages. Executive summary leaked before it was officially published. It used phrases Rosa had once written in the margins of her notes. Systemic negligence, criminal concealment, a designed pattern of financial coercion across multiple jurisdictions. And then there was one sentence Boone read aloud twice, as if to make sure he hadn't imagined it. This pattern would have remained buried without the independent documentation of Rosa Franklin. Rosa didn't cry when she heard it. She didn't smile either. She just turned the page. There was more to do, more names to file, more pages to number. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt sober. Because every folder still represented someone who had once been told, "There's nothing we can do." And now, someone was finally doing something. She received a call that night from a congressional liaison. They were preparing to hold the final hearing. Rosa was invited to attend. Reserved seating. Nameplate. All formalities in place. She declined. Instead, she asked if she could submit one final document, something not yet part of the official record. The liaison said yes. Rosa stayed up all night writing it. Not a legal brief, not a memoir. A simple, 19-page document titled, "What We Missed." She outlined every procedural flaw the task force hadn't yet flagged, every loophole she'd seen used, every blind spot in policy she believed could be exploited again. And at the end, she wrote, "If this ever happens again, it won't be because no one knew. It will be because someone chose not to care." Boone printed 3 copies, one for Congress, one for the archive, and one Rosa kept folded inside the front pocket of her coat. The hearing was scheduled for next Tuesday. She didn't plan to attend, but she had already made sure her voice would be heard. In ink, in evidence, in the hands of people who could no longer say, "We didn't know." The final hearing wasn't held in a marble hall or beneath a golden dome. It took place in a converted university auditorium, cinder block walls, flickering fluorescents, and folding tables that creaked every time someone shifted in their seat. The committee said they wanted to be closer to the people. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. There were still cameras, microphones, and bodyguards in plain clothes lining the walls. Protesters gathered outside with signs, some holding photos of loved ones, others clutching court dockets and sealed documents. Inside, the gallery was packed with journalists, lawyers, and those who had followed the story from the beginning. But Rosa wasn't there. She had declined the invitation, not out of protest, not out of exhaustion. She had already said what she needed to say, on paper, in files, in evidence. Her words were there, bound in the official record, scanned into the Library of Congress, read into the Congressional Ledger. Instead, she sat on a wooden bench miles away, beneath a sugar maple tree that had been in her family since Reconstruction. The kind of tree you bury generations beneath, and still feel them when the wind moves just right. She held a mug of warm tea in her hands. She wasn't watching the hearing, she was watching the leaves fall. Inside the auditorium, the hearing moved forward. The final report had been distributed. Copies printed, watermarked, and passed to every member of the committee. Pages turned, evidence presented. And then the chairwoman reached the last document in the stack of submission titled, "What We Missed," written by Rosa Franklin. Her voice cracked slightly as she read the final paragraph aloud. "If the law does not protect the people who need it most, then it is not law. It is theater." The room fell still. No shuffling, no whispers, just silence. Then, slowly, a single member of the panel stood. Then another. And then, one by one, the entire gallery followed. There were no chants, no cheers. Only standing. Outside, reporters called it a defining moment in modern oversight. Some said it was more powerful than any testimony. Others simply wrote, "A country paused." But Rosa wasn't watching. She was reading a letter. It had arrived that morning, handwritten on blue-lined paper. No return address, just the scrawl of a grieving mother. "My son was stopped, questioned, and never returned. They told me it was a misunderstanding. I lived with that lie for 8 years. Because of you, his name will live longer than his silence." Rosa folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her coat. Not with the files, not with the exhibits or court memos, with the things that mattered. Later that week, the old gas station was finally torn down. The rusted pumps were removed, the cracked asphalt repaved, a small, clean lot installed with bright LED lights. No ceremony, no ribbon cutting. Just quiet reconstruction. At pump number 4, the one where Rosa had been kicked to the ground, a brass plaque was bolted into the concrete. It didn't list her name. It didn't mention the incident. It simply read, "This is where someone stood," and got back up. Rosa visited once. Briefly. She stood in front of the plaque as the sun broke through a thin line of cloud. A teenager on a bike rolled by, did a double take, and slowed. He didn't pull out his phone, didn't ask for a selfie. He just nodded. And Rosa nodded back. They didn't say a word, because the truth doesn't always need repeating. Sometimes it just needs remembering. In the weeks that followed, the Oversight Committee released a set of 27 recommendations. 5 agencies were placed under independent review. 3 senior officials resigned. 2 private contractors lost federal licenses. And for the first time in years, public confidence in investigative accountability ticked upward. It wasn't a revolution. It was restoration. Slow, measured, earned. Boone called it an audit of the American conscience. Rosa called it a beginning. She never returned to the courtroom. She didn't write a book. She didn't accept the awards. Instead, she kept tending the archive, printing new documents people mailed in from all over the country. She gave the files new names. Not by state, not by date, but by voices, stories they silenced. Laws that broke, things we can't pretend we didn't see. Each folder, hand-labeled in black ink, placed on a shelf beside the old binders that started it all. When asked by a local reporter if she ever planned to publish it, Rosa simply said, "Not yet. It's still happening." And then, quietly, she returned to her work. Because telling the truth, she had learned, was never just one act. It was a practice, a resistance, a legacy. And Rosa Franklin wasn't finished keeping the record straight. What you just heard wasn't just a story, it was a mirror. It showed us that silence can be engineered, and injustice doesn't always come wearing a mask. Sometimes it comes in paperwork, in procedures, in people who smile while they bury the truth. But it also reminded us that resistance isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a woman at her kitchen table, quietly keeping receipts. Sometimes, it's standing back up in the place where you were knocked down, not because you have to, but because you must. For those of us who have lived long enough to know that systems protect themselves, Rosa Franklin's journey teaches us something essential: that truth matters, that documentation matters, and that dignity doesn't fade with age, it deepens. This story is a call to all of us, especially those who have spent decades raising families, paying taxes, voting, and watching promises turn hollow. You are not too old to stand. You are not invisible, and your voice, your memory, your story might be the piece that someone else needs to see the bigger picture. So if this story moved you, if it stirred something in your chest, or reminded you of something you thought the world had forgotten, then please, like this video, share it with someone who needs to remember, and subscribe to our channel to keep these voices alive, because the more of us who remember, the harder it is for anyone to pretend it didn't happen. Thank you for listening. Stay strong, stay curious, and never let the truth go undocumented.